In case you're time traveling from the past or have awoken from a coma, two things. First, I'm tremendously honored that you opted to take the time to watch my channel. And second, Donald Trump has been elected the 45th President of the United States. His ascendance to the nation's highest office is incredibly controversial, however. As others like C.G.B. Gray have already said, he does so not as the winner of the popular vote, but as the winner of the Electoral College. Trump secured 306 electoral votes, while Hillary Clinton secured 232. However, Clinton received almost 2 million more votes than Trump did at the time of filming. This makes it the second time in 16 years that the president has won the contest not off of the popular vote, but off of the Electoral College. Some people are understandably a smidge pissed off with the outcome. Protesters took to the streets in 36 states across the country for both this and a variety of other reasons, many chanting the phrase, "Not my president." A number of them mean this symbolically, as he did not get the popular vote, and they want to highlight that discrepancy, while others mean that as a way to try and influence the members of the Electoral College to intervene and change their votes. The latter is much less realistic than the former, although rumor is swelling about a contingent of Republican electors breaking away. The question stemming from the former, though, and the question on a number of people's minds, is whether or not we should remove the Electoral College and instead transition to a national popular vote system. The idea is not without its critics. Although many have simply dismissed these questions as people being sore losers, the question of the Electoral College's necessity has been around way before this election was even on the visible horizon, let alone decided. In fact, I found an article from the New York Times dating over 100 years ago that addresses this exact same controversy. Let's get one thing straight. There are legitimate arguments for the dismissal of the Electoral College and for its maintenance. It's a nuanced issue that needs to be debated and discussed sincerely and seriously. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about both the benefits and detriments of both the national popular vote system and the Electoral College, and we're going to do that by taking the arguments commonly evoked for both of them and critically breaking them down. Let's start with the Electoral College. There are four main arguments in support of maintaining it. 1. A popular vote system would just have it so that New York and California decide the election. 2. A popular vote system would mean that only a few highly populated areas can decide the election. 3. The Electoral College forces potential presidential candidates to deal with things on a state-by-state basis. And 4. The Electoral College allows smaller states to have more power, forcing a diversity of issues. So the first one is pretty easy to debunk, though. All it takes is a look through history, and not even that distant of history either. Let's look back at 2004 with Bush v. Kerry. You can see here that Kerry won both New York and California, but still lost the national popular vote, which means that these states are neither necessary nor sufficient to win the popular vote, just as a point of fact. The second argument is similar to the first in that it deals with concerns over the populist nature of the alternative. They're less of an endorsement of the Electoral College and more of a condemnation of the popular vote. A number of you may have seen or shared this meme that's been circulating around. It shows about 145 counties in blue and claims that these have half of the US population within them, and then asks us to imagine the rest of the country being dictated by the whims of this geographic minority. Hence why, arguably, we need the Electoral College. But like the first, this too tends to fold under scrutiny. First off, the counties highlighted are indeed representative of half the US population. That part's true, but it's not necessarily half of the voting age population. 13-year-olds can't vote, and honestly thinking back on how I was at that age, that's probably for the best. Oh god, why? Such an idiot. It also implies that all of the residents in these counties would vote for the same candidate, which is obviously impossible once you say it out loud, right? I mean, highly concentrated areas may tend to lean politically liberal, but they rarely ever, especially with the highly concentrated areas, like with millions of people, it's never 100% landslide. So I decided to make a different map based off of the voting age population, and under the assumption that 55% of the county voted for one person over the other. It's still not perfect because it assumes 100% turnout of the voting age population, but that's a whole other thorny issue. Here are the fewest counties necessary to win in such a scenario. I'll save you the trouble of pausing the video and trying to count. Almost 1,200, about 40% of the total counties in the United States. And you may notice that there are areas represented with diverse political tendencies. Florida's panhandle is solidly red, and the southeast tends to go blue, but they're both still there. Hawaii goes blue, but Alaska goes red. In fact, this provides representation for all but one state in the union, and that's assuming that somehow San Francisco elects the same candidate as Jacksonville. The city of Hell, Michigan literally freezes over more frequently. Winners of the popular vote would have to appeal to a wide variety of folk if they wanted to win, just like they have to now. That may sound like a validation of the third point, that it forces presidential candidates to visit smaller states and address their concerns. Unfortunately, that is also incorrect. First off, the idea of what constitutes a small state is often nebulous, so let's just say that it's any state under the median population. But when you look at the numbers, you find that a president doesn't need to win any more than 13 states in the Electoral College. meaning that just under half of the big states don't even matter in the electoral maths either. The system doesn't guarantee that small states or rural states matter. If they wanted that to be the case, they would have made the state have an equal number of electors. Not only that, but factually, candidates don't really visit small states that often either. I gathered data from the National Journal's candidate tracker and looked to see where President-elect Trump and Secretary Clinton, as well as their VP picks, visited. All four logged over 250 visits, or an average of 5 per state. But so many states didn't even receive a single visit at all. Those that did tended to be larger states or swing states. The Electoral College forces the same sort of populism that supporters fear drives the popular vote. The numbers just go through a slightly wonky filter woven from tradition and legislation first. However, in practice, the Electoral College does allow for smaller states to join into coalitions that force some of their issues to the forefront. Legislative coalitions comprised of the predominant parties in parliamentary systems, for instance, often end up being just shy of being able to form a government. So they turn to the smaller parties, who in turn often get to highlight particular issues or demand that certain things be brought to the fore. Although you don't see that sort of deliberation in the Electoral College anymore, it functionally acts in the same way. It enables small states to be a kind of electoral coalition that can swing the winner of the election. So, if it's down to the wire, a candidate will have to include issues salient to these states in their overall platform to secure the win. Now, this may sound all well and good, but we have to remember that there's a huge difference between enabling and guaranteeing small state representation. Remember, the system doesn't necessitate that small states be included for candidates to win, but has it that should they be needed, they're guaranteed to say. It just so happens that, historically, they've been needed. Alright, now let's switch gears over to the popular vote and to the 3 main reasons supporting it. 1. All of the citizens would get an equal say in the election. 2. We have the technology to get a reliable count of the popular vote, making the Electoral College antiquated. 3. More democracy is always better. So the first one is technically correct, but there are implications to this that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of. The idea that voters are weighted unequally originates from how the number of delegates in each state are assigned. Each state is given a minimum of 2 plus the number of representatives that they have in Congress. So at minimum, each state is apportioned 3. But that means that places like Rhode Island will get about 0.5% of the total electoral vote. That isn't much, but that's nearly twice as large as its proportion of the US population. California, on the other hand, has 12.5% of the population, but about 10% of the Electoral College vote. So, as the argument goes, a voter in Rhode Island's vote is worth more than one in California, despite the idea that everyone's vote should be equal. So, in the Electoral College, all votes are equal, but some votes are more equal than others. Opening up the system to a national popular vote would have it so that everyone's vote mattered the same mathematically. But if everyone's vote was perfectly equal, that means that outlets that have previously gone without significant media attention will now find themselves utterly inundated with it. Thought you got too many mailers and TV adverts now, but oh boy, it'd be pretty rough. This may sound inconsequential, or at most just something that needs to be dealt with, but elections are like ecosystems. There are a lot of things going on, and messing with one part of it is going to cause something else to happen somewhere else. In this case, the consequence lies with campaign funding. More people to be targeted means a more sophisticated ground game and more advertisements, and all of that translates to the candidates needing more just money. More funding exacerbates the cluster truck that is campaign finance. And considering that both the left and the right feels like there is way too much outsider money in politics, doing something that would make the situation worse needs to be approached with all of the appropriate caution. The second point often comes up in debates about the modern necessity of the Electoral College. See, one of the reasons that they came up with the idea of the Electoral College was pure technological necessity. The logistics of voting in a country as geographically spread out as the United States with the available technology at the time was just untenable. With advancements in voting and computer technology, we should be able to do so now. I mean, we went from literally dying of dysentery to Mars rovers, for crying out loud. We should be able to handle this, right? Except technological advancements don't mitigate the fact that elections are explicitly local events. I mean, well, first off, that assumes that all of our technology works perfectly and expeditiously, to which I reply, Florida both in 2000 and 2008, and I guess maybe Michigan here in 2016, although it's still a little bit early to call that. Even then, however, the presidential election is not a single national event so much as it is 51 concomitant ones, each with its own laws, rules, and protocols determining how and when the votes are tallied. And considering that there are tens of millions of votes, this process can take a while. As of recording, California is still counting ballots, just because it is such a huge frickin' state. Just because forecasters call a state on the night of the election doesn't mean that all of the votes in that state have been counted. A national popular vote would have to aggregate and extensively certify all of the results in all of the counties and then all of the states. All of this without any hiccups, screw-ups, or tampering. Not exactly an easy feat. One of the benefits of the Electoral College is that since the national popular vote is only supposed to guide the electors, it's possible for presidential elections to be decided quickly and for smooth transitions of power to occur, even when all of the votes haven't been certified yet. If there was a 99% chance that a state was going to lean one way, but then there was some technological snafu preventing every individual ballot from being counted, the electoral delegates of that state can act on that information accordingly. Not to say that this happens often, but the Electoral College is actually more flexible and changes with technology than a lot of people give it credit for. Sure, in theory the presidential election could become a nationalized affair, but that involves fundamentally redefining the kind of federalism that exists in the United States, and our notions of states' rights, which is a whole other mountains of unopened cans of worms that I'm just not going to get into here. But it does lead us to the final argument, that democracy is just always better. Although the United States and its citizens tend to be pretty supportive of democratic institutions, the fact of the matter is that democracy is not a well-defined term, and supporting any one of the multitudinous isotopes that are there is ultimately going to be a normative judgment. The one you favor and the degree to which you favor it is largely going to depend on your preferences. Some people conceive democracy as being encapsulated by the slogan, "That which touches all is decided by all," which is a fine notion, but there are some scholars who argue that unabated democratization may actually cause decreases instead of quality. The increased ideological extremity of political candidates, for instance, is often linked to the fact that only a few passionate people actively participate in primaries and caucuses. Before then, the parties often decided who the nominees would be through internal deliberation, and most of the time, they would end up being moderates within their ranks. Other people conceive democracy as being the orchestration of various cohabitating interests, some competing and others cooperating, in a world of limited resources. Something similar to the notion of factions as seen in the Federalist Papers, keeping each other in government in check and maintaining a least worst trajectory in the process. Which is also well and good, but tends to put a lot of power into the hands of elites and organizations who are not guaranteed to be as in touch with the needs and worries and concerns of the people and systems necessary to maintain the union. Ultimately, the popular vote would implicitly prioritize one version of democracy over another. Which, again, isn't endemically right or wrong, but it is wrong to assume that the issue is settled or that the other definition of democracy is somehow invalid because it doesn't comport with the personal feelings of the observer. Ultimately, there are benefits and challenges to either the popular vote or the Electoral College as a means of electing the president. But figuring out which to endorse is ultimately a function of what kind of democratic principles we feel the country needs to emphasize. It's an important conversation to have, but one that we need to have while earnestly acknowledging that there are other legitimate conceptions than those we may be predisposed to. And like with most debates, it ultimately comes down to theory. I knew that philosophy minor would come in handy. Useless mind! Here's where I normally ask what you guys would think, but I want to do something a little different here. What do you think is the serious benefits of the plan that you don't support? Are there other strengths or weaknesses that I didn't address here? And I guess after we're done pondering those, which system do you prefer, and why do you think that it is the superior alternative to the other one? Leave your answers down in the comments below, or maybe any other thoughts that cropped up while watching this video. Links for all the information I discussed as always are down in the doobly-doo, and if you enjoyed watching this video, I hope you'll consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.